It's 20,000 years ago. You're sitting by a fire somewhere in the middle of an ice age, and there's a dull throb pulsing in the back of your jaw. At first, it's nothing. A little sensitivity. You ignore it the way you ignore most things when your entire day is spent trying not to starve, not to freeze, not to get eaten by something with claws. But it doesn't go away. It gets worse. Within a few days, that dull throb has turned into something else entirely, a deep, pulsing, radiating pain that makes it hard to chew, hard to sleep, hard to think about anything else. Your jaw starts to swell. The skin over it gets hot to the touch, and somewhere deep inside that tooth, an infection is quietly building, with absolutely nowhere to go. There is no dentist within reach. There is no dentist anywhere on the planet. There's no antibiotic, no numbing gel, no pliers designed for the job, no concept of root canal. There is just you, your fire, your group, and a bacterial infection slowly deciding whether or not it's going to kill you. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This wasn't some rare, unlucky, one-in-a-million scenario for our ancestors. This was Tuesday. For most of human history, a bad tooth wasn't an inconvenience you scheduled an appointment for. It was one of the single most common ways an otherwise healthy adult human being could die. So the obvious question is, how did anyone survive this? For hundreds of thousands of years, with zero modern dentistry, zero anesthesia, zero antibiotics, how did the human species not simply get wiped out tooth by tooth, infection by infection? And here's where it gets genuinely strange, because the answer isn't they suffered constantly and died young. The real answer is stranger, more clever, and honestly more unsettling than you'd expect. Because if I asked you to picture the teeth of an ancient hunter-gatherer, you're probably picturing something specific. Crooked, yellowed, rotting stumps. Missing teeth. Constant pain. The classic caveman smile that pop culture has been feeding you for about a century now. Here's the problem. It's almost completely backwards. When anthropologists actually dig up the skeletal remains of pre-agricultural humans, people who lived by hunting, foraging, and gathering, before farming, before bread, before sugar, before any of it, they consistently find something that should not make sense to the modern brain. Remarkably straight teeth, full sets, all 32, properly aligned with room for every single one of them, including the wisdom teeth that give so many modern humans so much grief, and relatively low rates of cavities compared to what came right after. That's not a fluke. That's not one lucky skeleton. That's a pattern, found again and again on multiple continents across tens of thousands of years. And once you understand why, you start to realize that the story of ancient dental survival isn't really about ancient humans overcoming terrible teeth. It's about ancient humans accidentally having better teeth than most of the people watching this video right now. And then, at a very specific point in history, absolutely ruining it for everyone who came after. But we'll get to that betrayal in a minute. The first piece of this puzzle is diet, and it's simpler than you'd think. A hunter-gatherer diet was built around meat, fish, wild plants, nuts, roots, and fibrous vegetation. Tough, coarse, mechanically demanding food. Not one single gram of refined sugar, no flour, no soft, processed mush-in-your-mouth calories of any kind. That constant, heavy-duty chewing did something that modern soft diets simply don't do anymore. It worked the jaw like a muscle at the gym, session after session, meal after meal for an entire childhood. And a jaw that gets that kind of consistent mechanical stress during development grows larger and more robust than a jaw raised on soft bread, mashed food, and modern processed meals. A bigger, more fully developed jaw has one very direct consequence. There's simply more room. Room for every tooth to come in straight. Room for the back molars, including the wisdom teeth, to erupt properly instead of getting jammed sideways into a jaw that's too small to hold them. This is one of the reasons impacted wisdom teeth. One of the most common reasons people end up in a dentist's chair today were far less common in ancient skeletal remains. It's not that ancient humans had magic teeth. It's that their jaws were quite literally built bigger by the food they were forced to eat. Researchers studying the shift from traditional coarse diets to modern industrialized ones, most notably anthropologist Robert Crocini, comparing populations still eating traditional diets to populations that had shifted to soft modern food, found exactly this pattern. Populations on tougher, more traditional diets consistently showed straighter teeth and fewer alignment problems than genetically similar populations eating a softer modern diet. Same genes, different food, dramatically different mouths. And then there's the sugar problem, or rather, the total absence of one. Cavities are caused by bacteria feeding on sugars and starches left on your teeth, producing acid that eats through enamel. A hunter-gatherer simply wasn't handing that bacteria much to work with. No candy, no bread, no honey-soaked anything on a daily basis. Occasional wild honey or fruit, sure, but nothing remotely close to the sugar flood of a modern diet. Less sugar in, less acid produced, fewer cavities out. It's almost frustratingly simple, so that part of the mystery is solved. Ancient humans weren't surviving despite terrible teeth. In a lot of cases, they were working with genuinely excellent raw materials, but excellent raw materials don't mean invincible. Teeth still got damaged, worn down, cracked, infected. And that's where things get properly interesting, because it turns out ancient humans didn't just get lucky and wait it out. They fought back. And the evidence for this is honestly staggering. In 2015, a team led by Stefano Benazzi, an anthropologist at the University of Bologna, examined a molar tooth taken from a skeleton found in northern Italy, dated to roughly 14,000 years ago. And what they found on that tooth rewrote the timeline of dentistry as we knew it. The tooth had a cavity. That part isn't surprising. What was surprising was what someone had done about it. The inside of that cavity showed clear signs of deliberate scraping and picking, tiny repeated marks, consistent with someone using a small pointed stone tool to physically dig the decayed material out of the tooth. Not by accident. Not from normal wear. Deliberately, methodically, precisely, the way you'd clean out a wound. Someone, 14,000 years before the invention of writing, before agriculture, before cities, before anything we'd recognize as civilization, sat down with another human being and performed dental treatment on them using a sharpened piece of stone. That is, as far as the current evidence shows, the oldest known dental intervention in human history. And it wasn't an isolated, one-time fluke either, because roughly 5,000 years later, in a completely different part of the world, humans took it several steps further. In the mid-2000s, a team led by Roberto Macchiarelli examined skeletal remains from Mehrgarh, a Neolithic settlement in what is now Pakistan, dating back around 9,000 years. Published in the journal Nature, their findings were frankly ridiculous in the best possible way. Nearly a dozen molars from multiple individuals showed neat, precise, almost perfectly circular holes drilled directly into the surface of the teeth. Not cracks, not decay, drilled. Using a technology that already existed in that community for an entirely different purpose, the bow drill, the same tool used at the time to bore holes into beads for jewelry. Someone looked at the tool they used to make necklaces and thought, this could also work on a human tooth. And it did. Analysis showed the holes were made using a flint drill bit spun at high speed, almost certainly to remove decayed material from inside a cavity. An early, brutal, terrifyingly literal version of the drilling a modern dentist still does to you today, just without Novocaine, without suction, and without a waiting room magazine to distract you. Some of those drilled teeth showed evidence of healing after the procedure, meaning the patient survived the treatment and kept using the tooth for a while afterward. Somewhere in Neolithic Pakistan, 9,000 years ago, a human being sat completely still while another human being drilled into their tooth with a spinning stone bit and lived to chew another day. If that doesn't earn our ancestors a little respect, honestly nothing will. Now here's where the story gets stranger, and where a single, spectacularly wrong idea somehow infected nearly every major civilization on Earth independently. For thousands of years, across cultures that had no contact with each other whatsoever, humans arrived at almost exactly the same wrong explanation for why teeth hurt. A worm. A tiny worm living inside the tooth, chewing its way through from the inside, causing the pain. A Sumerian clay tablet dating back roughly 7,000 years describes the toothworm explicitly, blaming it for dental agony. Ancient Egyptian medical texts reference it. Ancient Chinese medical writings describe it. Indian Ayurvedic texts describe it. And astonishingly, this exact belief, the toothworm, persisted in parts of Europe all the way until the 18th century, roughly the same era as the invention of the steam engine. Educated physicians, people who understood orbital mechanics and were beginning to grasp basic chemistry, still occasionally blamed a phantom worm for a toothache. Why did completely unconnected civilizations land on the exact same wrong idea? Because the evidence to the naked eye is genuinely convincing. Cut open a badly decayed tooth and the exposed nerve tissue inside can look pale thread-like, almost worm-shaped. Combine that visual with agonizing, burrowing pain that feels like something is actively eating you from within, and the worm explanation practically writes itself. It's a beautifully wrong idea, built from real observation and understandable, if completely incorrect, logic. And this belief didn't stay theoretical. It shaped actual treatment. Ancient remedies across multiple cultures involved fumigating the mouth with smoke from specific seeds, believed to physically smoke the worm out of the tooth. Other remedies involved bitter herbal pastes packed directly into the cavity, intended to poison the worm into leaving. None of it worked the way anyone believed it did, but some of those remedies, by accident, likely had genuine antibacterial properties, meaning a treatment built on a completely wrong theory occasionally produced a real result anyway. Ancient medicine, stumbling into functional accuracy through confident nonsense. And here's the twist, and it's the part of this story that should genuinely bother you, because we've been trained to assume that human progress is a straight line upward. More civilization, better everything. Dental health does not follow that line. Dental health took a sharp, brutal turn for the worse the moment humans invented farming. When populations transitioned from hunting and gathering to agriculture, roughly 10,000 years ago, skeletal evidence shows a dramatic spike in cavities, tooth loss, and dental disease almost immediately. This isn't a slow trend. In the archaeological record, it shows up practically overnight relative to human history. Anthropologist Mark Nathan Cohen, in his influential work on the origins of agriculture, documented this pattern extensively across multiple regions and multiple independent transitions to farming, and found it strikingly consistent. Farming societies get worse teeth than the hunter-gatherer societies they replaced. Every single time, the reason is exactly what you'd expect once you think about it. Farming shifted the human diet toward carbohydrate-dense, starchy staple crops, wheat, barley, rice, corn, ground into flour, cooked into soft, sticky, sugar-releasing food that clings to teeth and feeds bacteria all day long. That same shift towards softer food also meant less mechanical stress on developing jaws, which meant smaller jaws, which meant less room for teeth, which meant crowding, misalignment, and impacted wisdom teeth becoming common for the first time in human history. In other words, the exact same civilization that eventually gave us written language, cities, and centuries later, actual professional dentistry, is also the civilization that created the dental crisis dentistry now exists to fix. Agriculture didn't just feed more people. It broke something in the human mouth that hunter-gatherers had never had to deal with at anywhere near the same scale. We invented the problem, and then, several thousand years later, we very slowly started inventing the solution. Once civilizations formed, dental problems didn't go away. They multiplied, thanks to that agricultural diet shift. So dental treatment had to formalize too, and the results ranged from genuinely impressive to absolutely nightmarish. In ancient Egypt, a man named Hezi, who lived around 2600 BCE, held a title on his tomb inscription that translates roughly to Chief of Dentists. That makes him the earliest named dental professional in recorded history. Egyptian remains show evidence of actual dental bridge work, loose or missing teeth, stabilized and held in place using thin gold wire wrapped around the surrounding teeth, a genuinely clever bit of engineering for the time. They also had methods for surgically draining dangerous abscesses, understanding on some level that the swelling and pus needed an outlet before the infection spread any further. In medieval Europe, dental care took a considerably rougher turn. There was no dedicated dental profession for most of this period. Instead, tooth extractions were performed by barbers, the same people cutting your hair and frequently performing basic surgery, hence the term barber surgeon. No anesthesia beyond alcohol, or if you were fortunate, being knocked briefly unconscious. Extraction involved iron pliers, brute strength, and a patient who simply had to endure it because the alternative, an untreated abscess spreading into the bloodstream, was very often fatal. And that's the detail that should really land here. An abscessed tooth left untreated isn't just painful. It's genuinely lethal. The infection can spread into the jaw, into the sinuses, into the bloodstream, into the brain. Before antibiotics existed, dental infection was a legitimate, common cause of death, killing kings, killing peasants, killing anyone regardless of status. Which means every single one of those brutal no anesthesia, hold them down and pull extractions performed by a medieval barber wasn't some archaic inconvenience. It was, quite literally, life-saving surgery dressed up as a haircut appointment. Step back for a second and look at the full shape of this story, because it's a genuinely strange one. Ancient humans, for the vast majority of our history, were working with teeth better suited to their diet than most modern humans are working with today. When things went wrong, they didn't just suffer helplessly. They scraped cavities out with sharpened stone 14,000 years ago. They drilled into teeth with bow drills 9,000 years ago. They engineered gold dental bridges in ancient Egypt. They performed extractions with nothing but iron and nerve for most of recorded history. Every single person alive today walking around with a full, mostly functional set of teeth is standing on top of an unbroken chain of desperate, painful, genuinely brave dental interventions stretching back tens of thousands of years, most of it performed with absolutely no pain relief whatsoever. The next time a dentist's chair feels uncomfortable, or a filling feels like an inconvenience worth complaining about, it's worth remembering that the alternative, throughout almost the entirety of human history, was not no treatment. The alternative was very often death. So let's go back to that person by the fire. 20,000 years ago, jaw throbbing, infection building, absolutely no dentist for 100,000 years in any direction. What actually happened to them? Based on everything the archaeological record shows us, there were really only three possible outcomes. Someone in their group, using nothing but a sharpened stone, a steady hand, and whatever crude understanding of infection existed at the time, dug the source of the pain out by force, and they survived, scarred but alive. carrying a story that never got written down anywhere except in the marks left behind on their own tooth. Or the body fought the infection off on its own, the way healthy immune systems sometimes manage to do even without help. Or, and this happened often enough to be one of the most common causes of death in the ancient world, they didn't survive at all, and became one more skeleton for a future anthropologist to dig up and quietly add to the statistics. There is no dramatic, guaranteed happy ending here, because there wasn't one in real life either. That's the honest, slightly uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire story. We are the direct descendants of the people who got lucky, who had someone nearby willing to pick up a sharp rock and help, or whose bodies simply won the fight on their own. Every single one of us carries 32 small, quiet monuments in our own mouths right now to tens of thousands of years of exactly that struggle, and to how astonishingly recent it is that the struggle finally started getting easier. If this pulled you in, hit subscribe, because this channel goes deep into exactly this kind of story. The strange, overlooked, genuinely wild history hiding behind things we take completely for granted. Drop a comment and tell me what you'd rather have faced back then, the stone scraper or the bow drill, I want to note. And if you made it all the way to the end of this one, you already know what to do next. Go watch the one right after this, because it's just as unhinged.